He showed up in his best suit, holding a letter from the widow, but they turned him away like he didn't matter. Then a 4-star general saw him and brought the entire funeral to a stop. The train hissed as it slowed to a stop at Union Station in Washington, D.C. Clarence Delroy, 82, stood up slowly from his seat, tugging gently at the cuffs of his white shirt under his brown wool blazer. His slacks were freshly pressed, though a bit loose around the waist. His shoes had a shine that told you he'd taken time that morning. Not because anyone would see, but because it mattered to him. A woman seated across the aisle, maybe in her late 30s, smiled as Clarence picked up his worn leather bag. "You visiting family, sir?" she asked politely, her eyes kind. Clarence gave a small smile back. "No, ma'am. A friend. Funeral." "Oh, I'm sorry," she said softly. He gave a short nod, then adjusted his brown felt hat and turned toward the exit. He didn't need to explain further. Not today. As he stepped onto the platform, the cool morning air hit him in the face, carrying the faint smell of diesel, coffee, and something sweet from a vendor cart nearby. Clarence took it all in quietly. The city was noisy, alive, but he wasn't here for the city. He moved slowly, his gait stiff but steady, a product of too many years on hard floors. 43 years pushing a mop at Langston High School in Birmingham. Never missed a day, except the week his wife passed. Now, it was just him. No kids, no siblings, just memories. He reached the taxi line. A young man in a navy blue hoodie skipped the line, stepping in front of him. Clarence didn't say a word. He just waited. When his turn finally came, he gave the driver the address of Arlington National Cemetery. The driver looked at him through the mirror. "Big service there today," he said, chewing gum. 4-star general, should be packed." Clarence nodded. Yes, he was a good man. The driver didn't ask more. Just drove, music low, windows cracked. Clarence sat silently, staring out as the city gave way to monuments, trees, and flags. His thoughts drifted, back to Montgomery Road in Tuskegee, where he and Thomas Becket first met in '49. Back then, one of them was the preacher's son, the other just the kid from the mill houses. Somehow they became inseparable, played stickball in the street, got into fights over nothing, shared cold watermelon on hot days. They went to war together in '67. Only one of them came home with medals. Clarence never minded. What mattered wasn't the brass. It was the bond. The taxi pulled up near the south gate of the cemetery. Clarence handed over a 20 and stepped out slowly. Rows of cars lined the street. Men in uniform stood at attention. He saw a long black hearse up ahead and dozens of white chairs neatly arranged under a green canopy. He was almost there. Clarence paused to adjust his collar and reached into his blazer pocket. He pulled out an envelope. Handwritten on the front in neat cursive, "Mr. Clarence Delroy, please escort to front. Sincerely, Rebecca Becket." He looked at it for a moment, then tucked it back inside his coat. With his heart steady but heavy, he walked toward the main entrance, alone, unnoticed, and carrying decades of quiet history that no one here yet understood. But the moment he stepped off the curb, the first sign of trouble appeared. Clarence stepped onto the sidewalk in front of the south gate and took a moment to steady himself. A young officer, no more than 25, stood at the checkpoint, crisp in his dress blues. He was flanked by another, taller, just as sharp, both scanning guests with practiced detachment. Clarence gave them a polite nod and reached inside his blazer. He held out the envelope. "Morning, sirs. I'm here for General Beckett's service. His wife said to show you this." The shorter officer took the envelope, squinted at the handwriting, then glanced at Clarence. He gave a tight smile. Polite, but forced. "Sir, do you have your name on the official list?" Clarence shook his head. "I was told this would do. I knew the general. Served with him." The taller officer leaned over to read the envelope, then looked up. "We need to verify names through the master list. Orders from the family liaison." Clarence stayed quiet for a moment. His voice stayed calm, but there was a certain weight behind it when he spoke next. "I came a long way. Just want to pay respects. That man meant the world to me." The younger one shifted uncomfortably. "I hear you, sir. But without clearance, we can't let you in." This is a high-level event. It's not personal. Clarence looked past them, toward the rows of seats filling fast. The ceremony hadn't started, but people were moving with purpose. Brass buttons, flags, somber faces. He could hear a bugler warming up. He took off his hat, held it to his chest, and tried again. I'm not here to cause trouble. That man back there. He pointed toward the hearse. I pulled him out of a rice field with a hole in his chest. Ain't trying to steal nobody's seat. They didn't budge. I'm sorry, sir, the tall one repeated. We've got our orders. Clarence stepped back. His hands stayed steady, but his eyes dropped to the pavement. A couple behind him whispered as they walked past. They glanced at him, then turned away. One of them, an older man in a grey suit, offered him a small, awkward nod, but he kept walking too. Clarence moved to the side and leaned against the stone wall near the gate. His knees ached from the long ride. The sun had climbed higher now, and sweat beaded on his brow. He wiped it with a handkerchief. From his coat, he pulled out a folded photo. It was worn and soft at the creases. Two young men, muddy and smiling in fatigues. Beckett had an arm around his shoulder, laughing like the world hadn't just caught fire around them. Clarence stared at the photo, then folded it back into his coat. A few minutes passed, then a few more. The officers had gone back to scanning guests, asking for names, waving people through. A woman in all black brushed past him, smelling faintly of perfume and powder. A child followed her, holding his mother's hand, bouncing slightly in shiny shoes. Clarence stood there like a statue, still hopeful, but fading. Every few seconds his eyes drifted back to the green canopy, where the casket now rested beneath an American flag. A younger soldier walked by, carrying a clipboard. Clarence called out softly, "Son." The soldier turned. "Yes, sir. I'm trying to get in. Served with the general." The young man hesitated. "Do you have credentials?" Clarence showed him the envelope. The soldier read it, then offered a half smile. "Let me check with the list coordinator." He disappeared inside the gate. 10 more minutes passed. No one came back. Clarence shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Still waiting. Still invisible. But Clarence wasn't one to raise his voice, until he saw the ceremony starting without him. Con Tum Province, South Vietnam. June 1968. The jungle was loud that day. Cracking branches, distant shouts, the low stammer of gunfire ricocheting off trees, mud soaked into everything, even your bones. Clarence Delroy was crouched behind a tree stump, rifle clutched tight, eyes scanning the smoke ahead. His chest rose and fell quickly. Sweat dripped into his eyes, but he didn't blink. The platoon had been ambushed. What was supposed to be a recon run turned into chaos. "Beckett!" he shouted over the gunfire. "You got eyes on the ridge." Thomas Beckett, then just Lieutenant Beckett, ducked low beside him, bleeding from his shoulder. His helmet was gone, dirt smeared across his jaw. "Negative! We're boxed in! Radio's dead!" Clarence cursed under his breath, then looked behind them. 2 more soldiers lay prone, not moving. He didn't dare check if they were breathing. A burst of AK fire erupted just ahead, and Beckett winced as a round grazed his thigh. He went down hard. Clarence didn't hesitate. He grabbed Beckett by the collar and dragged him behind a fallen tree. "You stay with me. You hear?" Clarence said, out of breath but focused. "You don't tap out on me today." Beckett grimaced, trying to stay upright. "Go. Just go. I'll slow you down." Clarence ignored him. He reached into Beckett's vest, pulled out a small smoke grenade, and yanked the pin. With a practiced motion, he tossed it toward the tree line where the enemy fire was thickest. Purple smoke burst into the air, covering them for a few seconds. It was all they needed. Clarence hauled Beckett up and over his shoulder. He ran low and fast, legs screaming, heart punching at his ribs. He didn't stop until they reached a shallow trench, half covered by tangled brush. He lowered Beckett down gently, hands slick with blood, some his, some not. Beckett coughed, eyes wide. "You're crazy, Delroy." "You're damn lucky I am," Clarence said, checking the wound. Gunfire started to fade as the rest of the unit circled back and pushed through the ridge. The ambush was broken. Reinforcements came soon after. Clarence stayed by Beckett's side the whole ride back to base, held pressure on the wound, kept talking, made him laugh even when he could barely breathe. After that day, Beckett called Clarence my shadow. Not in public, though. Back in Alabama, they never talked much about the war, not because they didn't want to, but because folks only saw one of them in uniform. Only one got his name in the papers. Still, whenever Beckett visited home, he made sure to stop by Clarence's porch, sometimes with a bottle, sometimes just to sit in silence and listen to the cicadas. But the story of Kontum? That one stayed between them. Beckett tried once, tried to recommend Clarence for a medal. Clarence had laughed him off. "I didn't carry you out for a medal," he'd said. "I did it because I wasn't about to let your loud mouth die in that swamp." And Beckett had just grinned. But back in the present, the only battle Clarence faced was for a seat at his friend's funeral. Clarence stood off to the side, one hand resting on the stone wall, the other holding the envelope he had shown 3 times already. The same envelope that kept getting him nothing but polite dismissals and empty promises. The sun had climbed high enough now to beat down full on the back of his neck. He loosened his tie slightly and shifted his stance to ease the ache in his right hip. He watched as more guests arrived, men and women in black suits and dresses, officers with polished medals across their chests, quiet children holding on to someone's hand. They all had badges, passes, names that matched the list. None of them looked his way. A black SUV pulled up to the front, and 3 high-ranking officers stepped out. They exchanged firm handshakes with the liaison near the entrance and were quickly ushered through. Clarence looked back toward the canopy. A chaplain had stepped up now. The crowd under the tent began to settle. He tried again. He walked back to the gate and tapped the shoulder of one of the junior officers. "Sir," he said, this time with a little more urgency in his voice. "I came here because General Beckett asked me to. That envelope, it's not just a piece of paper. It's from his wife. We've known each other 70 years. The officer, looking genuinely uncomfortable now, nodded stiffly but said, "We're sorry, Mr. Delroy. We've got a strict protocol today. I can't make that call." Clarence swallowed hard. "Is the family liaison here? Rebecca? She's inside the perimeter. We're not allowed to pull her out right now." He stepped back, deflated. The answer wasn't just no. It was that no one was going to lift a finger to try. He watched as a group of white chairs near the front filled up. A few people walked past him, making space for a man in a dark green uniform who seemed important. Everyone seemed important today. He wasn't angry. Not yet. But there was a sharp burn in his chest now. Not because of pride. It was something else. Something heavier. He pulled out the envelope again and opened it slowly. Inside was a short, handwritten note on cream stationery. "Clarence, if you decide to come, please show this to any staff member. Thomas would want you sitting with us. Always, Rebecca." He folded it carefully and slid it back into his pocket. He could have sat on the curb, could have turned back. But that wasn't how he was raised. That wasn't how his mama taught him to carry himself. He reached into his bag, pulled out a small, worn piece of cloth, folded tight. It was a makeshift armband from Vietnam, faded green, with 2 initials, TB, stitched by hand with fishing line. Beckett had made it for him after they made it out of Kontum Ale. "You wear that," Beckett had said. "That way, even if I don't make it, part of me's still there with you." Clarence had kept it for over 50 years. He stood tall now, straightened his back, slipped the armband onto his left wrist. His hand trembled slightly as he adjusted it. Still, no one noticed. Or if they did, they didn't say anything. One officer checked his watch. Another waved in a last-minute family member. Clarence remained invisible. Right there, in the open. He heard the opening prayer begin. Heard the low hum of the eulogy starting over the loudspeakers. He shifted his feet again and let his eyes fall to the ground, trying to will his anger back down into the quiet place he always kept it. But sometimes it only takes one person to notice. From the far end of the field, just beyond the seated rows and standing guests, a tall figure in full uniform began making his way toward the south gate. His pace was deliberate, not rushed, but direct, like a man who knew exactly where he was going and why. The ribbons on his chest caught the light, and the 4 silver stars on each shoulder didn't need introduction. General Raymond E. Callister was known in military circles for being a man who didn't waste words or time. He commanded respect because he gave it where it was earned. Not just upward, not just sideways, downward too, where real loyalty lives. He stopped near a staff sergeant positioned near the center aisle and leaned in. "Who's the man outside the gate?" he asked, not loud but clearly. The sergeant looked startled. "Sir? That man!" Callister pointed toward the wall, where Clarence stood, still as ever, his blazer now lightly speckled with dust from the wind. "Why is he standing out there while the service is happening?" The sergeant stammered. "We weren't given clearance for him, sir. Security said—" Callister raised a hand. No anger, just finality. "Hold the ceremony." The chaplain's voice faded mid-sentence as Callister turned and walked, straight down the path, past rows of confused guests, past generals and colonels, officers and civilians. His boots struck the pavement with a rhythm that cut through the soft murmurs rising across the crowd. At the gate, the 2 junior officers saw him coming and straightened instantly. "General Callister, sir," one began. He ignored them. Instead, he walked up to Clarence and stopped just short of him. He looked him over, really looked. Not just the suit, or the weathered skin, or the tired eyes. He saw something else. "Sir," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "What is your name?" Clarence took a half-step forward. "Clarence Delroy." Callister nodded once. "You knew General Beckett?" Clarence's voice caught, but he steadied it. "Since I was 9. Served with him too. Khartoum, 1968. Callister stood silent for a beat. Then he lifted his right hand, firm and proud, and gave Clarence a full military salute. Not a quick one. Not a nod. A real one. Clarence blinked. Callister lowered his hand and spoke again. "Mr. Delroy, would you allow me the honor of escorting you to your seat?" Clarence opened his mouth but couldn't find the words. He simply nodded. Callister offered him his arm. They walked together, shoulder to shoulder, down the path toward the funeral service. The crowd, once murmuring, was now dead quiet. Every head turned. Every eye watched. The junior officers didn't say a word. One stepped aside so quickly he nearly dropped his clipboard. As they approached the front row, Beckett's widow, Rebecca, stood, her eyes welled with tears as she took Clarence's hand. "I told you he'd come," she whispered, voice trembling. He squeezed her fingers gently. General Callister turned to the chaplain and gave a quiet nod. "You may continue," he said. Then he took his seat, still watching Clarence, like a man who understood he'd just witnessed something greater than protocol. But the moment they walked together toward the family, the entire crowd went silent. Clarence lowered himself slowly into the empty seat beside Rebecca, adjusting his blazer and sitting up straight, not out of formality, but respect. The seat had been saved for him. Of that he was certain now. Not by protocol, not by planners, but by someone who knew what mattered more than rules. Rebecca didn't speak right away. She simply rested her hand lightly on Clarence's. It stayed there for a long minute while the chaplain resumed the service. Her grip was light, but constant, like a memory you don't want to let go of. Clarence looked straight ahead. The flag-draped casket rested beneath the canopy, surrounded by wreaths and a photo of General Thomas Beckett from his final tour in Afghanistan. Grey hair, steady eyes, the same stubborn chin. He didn't recognize half the people in the front row, but it didn't matter. None of them had pulled Beckett out of a trench in Vietnam with bullets flying overhead. None of them sat with him in a barracks tent, passing a bottle and talking about home. The chaplain spoke about duty, about legacy, about honor. But Clarence didn't hear much of it. His mind drifted to a cold morning in Alabama, years after the war, when Beckett showed up on his porch with a box of tools. "What's that for?" Clarence had asked. Beckett shrugged. "I heard your water heater's acting up." Clarence grinned then. "You a general or a plumber?" "Today I'm your damn plumber," Beckett had replied, kneeling right down and getting to work like it was nothing. That was the real man, not the medals, not the salutes, but the friendship that lasted 60 years and never needed cameras to mean something. A slight movement snapped Clarence back. One of Beckett's sons, Theodore, leaned over from 2 seats away. He looked to be in his 50s, broad-shouldered like his father had been, same clipped voice. "Mr. Delroy," he said softly, "I just want to say thank you. Dad talked about you a lot. Said you were the reason he ever came home." Clarence gave a small smile. "We kept each other alive, one way or another." Theodore nodded, eyes moist. "I'm glad you're here." Clarence looked ahead again, eyes fixed on the casket. "So am I." As the service continued, a few people in the audience began whispering. They didn't know who the old man was, but they saw the 4-star general escort him, saw the widow greet him like family. And when a Beckett's son leaned in to speak, they understood he wasn't just anyone. Behind the crowd, someone pulled out a phone and quietly took a picture. Not to be disrespectful, but because they knew something rare had just happened. It would spread later. The story would be told in headlines and captions. But for Clarence, none of that mattered. This was his goodbye. His seat wasn't just at the front of a funeral. It was at the center of a story that had never needed telling before now. The chaplain stepped back. A Marine folded the flag into a perfect triangle. As it was handed to Rebecca, she didn't look at the officer. She looked at Clarence, and with trembling hands, she passed it to him. Clarence tried to protest, but she shook her head. "Tom wanted you to have it." He took it, carefully, reverently, and held it against his chest like something sacred. But Clarence still hadn't said his goodbye. Not really. After the final prayer, when the chairs began to empty and murmured conversations replaced the chaplain's voice, Clarence stayed seated. The flag rested in his lap, both hands holding it like something that might blow away if he let go. Rebecca leaned over and whispered, "He wrote you something, few days before he passed." She reached into her handbag and pulled out a sealed envelope. No stamp, no address. Just Clarence's name, written in Beckett's unmistakable scrawl. Clarence took it gently, eyes scanning the curves of each letter like they might disappear if he blinked too long. He waited until the crowd had thinned, until the rifle salute had echoed through the hills and the bugle's final note had hung long enough in the air to feel like a breath held too long. Only then did he open the letter. The paper was thick, folded in 3, slightly smudged where the pen had pressed a little too hard. Clarence unfolded it with care, his fingers trembling slightly at the edges. "Clarence, if you're reading this, I made it where you can't follow. Not yet, anyway. I tried writing this a few times and kept starting over. How do you write to the one man who knew you before the uniform and still stuck around after the medals stopped meaning anything?" Clarence swallowed. "I think about that day in Quantum more than I care to admit. Not because I almost died, but because that's when I realized something. You don't need rank to save a man's life. You don't need a title to be his brother. You just need to care more about someone else than yourself. You've done that your whole life. For your community. For your students. For me. I never told you this, but when I made Brigadier, they offered me the choice of anyone for my ceremony pin. I almost chose the general who mentored me, but I thought of you. Standing in the rain that night in Nam, laughing while bullets cracked past our heads. And I knew there was no one who'd earned it more. I just didn't have the guts to make that choice public. I'm sorry for that." Clarence's jaw tightened. "But if I've got one regret, it's not speaking your name louder. You were the bravest man I ever met. I hope Rebecca finds a way to get you into that front row, and I hope when you sit down, you remember this. I don't care who's watching or who thinks they know what matters. You mattered. To me. Always. Your brother, Tom." Clarence folded the letter again. Slower this time. He held it between both hands, resting it against the flag on his lap. Around him, people talked quietly, drifted toward cars, made plans for after. But Clarence sat still, reading the last lines again in his mind. Not for clarity, but to keep the voice of his oldest friend from fading too soon. He had never been a man of many tears. He hadn't cried when his father died, or even when his wife slipped away quietly in her sleep. But now, one warm line welled up and slipped down his cheek. He wiped it away with the back of his hand, slow and discreet. No drama, just truth. But there was one more moment no one expected. Just as the last guests began to drift away and the folding chairs were being collected by cemetery staff, Clarence stood. He tucked the letter carefully into his inside pocket, slid the folded flag under his arm, and walked toward the casket. There were still a few military personnel lingering near the canopy. General Callister remained seated in the second row, legs crossed, watching Clarence without a word. He didn't move, didn't blink much, just followed the old man with a gaze that felt more like a promise than a stare. Clarence stepped to the edge of the platform where the casket rested. The sunlight hit the flag draped across it, colours rich and bright against the muted greys and greens around them. Clarence rested his hand on the wooden edge for a moment, closed his eyes, and took a breath. Then, slowly, he turned. "I know I ain't supposed to speak," Clarence said, voice steady, but carrying just enough to be heard by those still near. "But I need to say something. Not for the general. Not even for his family. For me." He took another step forward, flag still under his arm, hat now in his hand. "I knew Tom Beckett before any of y'all called him sir. Before the medals. Before the politics. Before the speeches. He was just Tom to me. The boy who stole my lunch twice and gave it back both times 'cause he felt bad." A few people smiled. "I carried him once, when he was bleeding out and cussing me the whole way. And he carried me too. Not literally, maybe, but in ways that matter." Clarence glanced at Callister, who gave the faintest nod. "I got told I didn't belong here, that I wasn't on no list, that maybe I was just some old man. And you know what? I am. But I was also Tom's brother." He paused. "I'm proud of that." Clarence turned back to the casket. He raised his hand, slowly, and gave a salute. It wasn't crisp. His elbow wavered a little. His fingers didn't quite line up perfect. But it was full of memory, of mud and sweat and tears and years. And then, a voice behind him. "Detail! Attention!" The command cut through the air like a bell. Clarence turned slightly. General Callister had risen. He faced the casket and raised his own hand in a sharp, flawless salute. "Present arms!" Across the field, nearly 24 uniformed service members, some seated, some already walking away, snapped to attention and lifted their hands in unison. Officers, lieutenants, even a young cadet barely out of school. Not because protocol told them to, because the general had. And more than that, because they saw a man worth honouring. Clarence stood there, frozen in disbelief, caught between pride and the weight of it all. For the first time that day, he didn't feel like someone trying to prove he belonged. He knew. And for a long, silent moment, the air held firm with reverence. Then the general dropped his hand. The salute ended. One by one, the others followed. Callister stepped forward slowly. No aids, no ceremony. He extended his hand. "Mr. Delroy," he said, quiet but clear. "Thank you for your service. To this country, and to General Beckett." Clarence took the hand. They shook once, firmly. "You honoured him today," Callister said. "More than any words I've heard spoken." Clarence nodded. "He honoured me long before this, but long after the uniforms left, Clarence remained. As the last cars rolled away and the canopy came down, Clarence remained by the grave. The cemetery crew worked in respectful silence nearby, waiting but not rushing him. The day had quieted. The ceremony was over. But Clarence wasn't done. He took a seat on the low stone ledge nearby, the folded flag still held close. His knees protested the weight of the day, but he ignored them. Slowly, he leaned forward and looked at the casket one last time before the earth would take it. He cleared his throat, not for anyone else, just to steady himself. "I told myself I wouldn't talk too long," he muttered, "but I guess that ship sailed." His voice was soft, more like thinking out loud than speaking. He wasn't talking to a general anymore, just to Tom. "You remember that summer in 55, when you broke your arm trying to climb that water tower out behind Jackson's farm? I told you not to. I told you the ladder was rusted. You never listened." Clarence chuckled once under his breath, then grew quiet again. "I still remember the look on your mama's face when she saw us walking down the street." Me dragging you by the waist, you crying like a fool. She didn't even ask what happened. She just gave me a cold rag and pointed to the porch." He paused, then looked out across the rows of graves, white stones standing at attention across the hillside. "I never said it right before. Probably 'cause I didn't know how. But I loved you like my own blood, Tom. You weren't just a friend. You were my family." His voice cracked slightly. "I guess I always thought we'd go out together. One day, side by side, grey and slow, arguing about whose knees were worse or who forgot to bring the fishing poles again." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thin chain. The dog tags Tom had given him back in 1970, just before he redeployed. Clarence had kept them ever since. He ran his thumb over the cold metal, then crouched carefully and set them gently on the casket's surface. "I figured it's time they go back where they belong." He straightened up with effort and looked at the ground beneath his feet. "I'll carry what's left of us, Tom, like always. But I want you to know, whatever you thought you owed me, you paid it in full. Every time you showed up, every time you called, every time you let me sit on that porch and just be seen." He blinked slowly. "I'll be all right. I'll keep walking. But I won't forget. I can't." Then he did something he hadn't done in decades. Clarence raised both hands, clasped them in front of him, and closed his eyes. "Lord, thank you for letting me know this man. Thank you for letting us grow old, even if we didn't grow old together. And thank you for letting him rest today, with someone who remembered who he really was." He opened his eyes. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves above. Somewhere nearby, a bird called once, then flew off. Clarence gave the casket one last look. Then he turned, slow but sure, and began the long walk back down the paved road. Step by step, past the empty chairs, past the now quiet hillside. Each footstep steady, grounded. And then, slowly, he rose. A week later, back in Birmingham, Clarence was kneeling on the front porch of a neighbour's house. Her door kept sticking at the top, and he'd told her more than once he'd fix it. That morning, he showed up with a screwdriver, some wood filler, and a small folding stool that creaked every time he shifted his weight. "Mr. Clarence, you sure you want to do that in this heat?" the woman asked from the doorway, holding a glass of lemonade she insisted he take. "I'm already here," he said without looking up. "Ain't no point in waiting till it gets worse." He took the lemonade anyway. One sip, then right back to work. That's how he'd always done things. Even now, the funeral felt like something far away, like it happened in another life, until her son came running down the steps, holding a phone. "Mr. Clarence, you're on the internet!" Clarence blinked. "I'm what?" The boy spun the phone around. There it was. Grainy footage of General Callister walking across the cemetery, stopping at the gate, saluting Clarence. Then the funeral crowd, the hush, the moment of stillness. Over 1 million views. A title in bold. 4-star general stops entire funeral for a stranger. Except Clarence wasn't a stranger. He watched a few seconds, then handed the phone back. That's something." The boy looked confused. "You're not excited?" Clarence smiled. "That wasn't for the cameras, son. That was just a man doing right by another man." Back inside his house, the letters and photos from the funeral still sat on the kitchen table. The flag was folded neatly inside a glass case a cousin had brought over. People had called, local reporters, veterans groups, even a podcast producer from California who said the moment deserved to be heard. Clarence had said the same thing to all of them. "I already said what I needed to say." But one morning, he sat down at the dining table with a pen and an envelope. He wrote a short letter. "General Callister, thank you for stopping, for looking me in the eye, for not needing proof. I didn't expect what you did, but I won't forget it. You saw me, and you saw Tom in me. That's enough. Clarence Delroy." He mailed it the next day, no return address. Life went on. Clarence fixed a broken window screen for the widowed man across the street. He volunteered once a week at the high school library, just organizing books and occasionally falling asleep in the reading chair when no one was looking. People still came up to him at the grocery store. "You're that man from the funeral," they'd say. And Clarence would nod, shake their hand, maybe say a word or two. But he never told them the whole story. Not because he didn't want to, but because he knew some things only lived fully between two people. And one of them was already gone. Still, there was one moment that stuck with him. A few weeks after the funeral, while walking past a small park, he noticed a young man in uniform sitting alone on a bench. He looked nervous, restless, maybe pre-deployment, maybe something else. Clarence sat beside him without a word and just rested his hands on his cane. After a minute, the young man looked over. "You that guy? From Arlington?" Clarence didn't answer. He just smiled a little. The soldier nodded. "My granddad showed me the video. Said that's how men used to carry themselves." Clarence exhaled slowly and looked out toward the trees. "We just tried not to forget each other," the soldier nodded again. They sat in silence a while longer before Clarence rose to go. As he walked away, the young man stood and saluted him. No audience, no camera, just one person to another. Clarence tipped his hat in return. Because in the end, it was never about recognition. Not for him, not for Tom. It was about showing up, about keeping promises, about being seen when it counted, and maybe, just maybe, reminding a few folks what honor still looks like. If this story moved you, share it with someone who deserves to be remembered. And if you've got a Clarence in your life, someone who's walked beside you in the quiet, let them know. Today,